This week on the show, I'm talking to Joel Goodsell, a lead game designer from Insomniac Games. We talk about his experience as a design lead on Ratchet and Clank for PS4 and working on Sunset Overdrive. We also discuss what game designers can do to take their career to the next level.
From jollygoodjobs.com, it's the Jolly Good Show! Discussing the games industry and life within it. Here's your host, Mark Pope.
Hello and welcome to the Jolly Good Show. This week I'm very happy to have Joel Goodsell from Insomniac Games on the line. Hey Joel, how's it going?
Hey Mr. Pope, it's good to hear from you again.
Yeah, so Joel and I worked together many years ago, and I thought he'd be a great person for me to manipulate into coming onto the podcast. So just to give a little bit of a background on Joel, I don't want to give out your age, but let's say your first ship game was on the Genesis. So that gives us a rough kind of like window of where you are.
That does indeed.
And so we worked together back at Heavy Iron, and you left around about 8 years ago, was it?
Actually, I left Heavy Iron about 11 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago.
Okay.
And then I went over to Disney for 2 years, and then I went to Insomniac from there.
Got it. Okay, so the last about 8 was Insomniac, and
yeah.
And in that time, if I got this right, so you worked on Ratchet and Clank: A Crack in Time.
I did.
And then the Resistance Fall of Man series.
Yes.
Cool. And then you were one of the design leads on Sunset Overdrive.
Yes, although the relationship there is a little complex. So, you might say I actually fulfilled a senior design role along with several other people.
Right.
It's a big game. So there were a lot of people who needed to lead different parts of the project.
Right. And then most recently, you were lead designer on Ratchet and Clank for the PS4, which is out next spring to accompany the movie of the game of the movie. No, I forget how it goes.
Yes, exactly.
That one. Yeah. That's cool. So I'm just going to dive in. So you were lead designer on Ratchet for PS4, which is, that's pretty huge.
Thank you.
What's it like developing something with such high expectations riding on it? Because I know that like everyone that played Ratchet absolutely, back in the day, absolutely loved it. And there's a movie coming out, with this one, and it's on PS4, so it's got to be next gen. So I can only imagine like the highest expectations being on this. And you're the lead designer, so kind of the buck stops with you a lot on, is it fun and, is it going to be successful? So like, what's it like being in that hot seat?
So even though I was the official lead designer on that particular title, I really shared that role a lot with several other people. We split the work between our North Carolina studio and our Burbank studio. So at the Burbank studio, I was the lead designer there as well as the lead designer of the project. But another gentleman by the name of Mike Daly really functioned as sort of another lead designer over a slightly smaller team in North Carolina, as well as the studio heads in the North Carolina studio were enormously functional in also overseeing the overall quality. And specifically, Sean McCabe was just there all the time. And then overall, the project also, has a creative director over the whole thing, Brian Algier, who has been the creative director on a number of Ratchet and Clanks, including A Crack in Time, where he and I worked together pretty closely. And so, even though, the title lead designer is this big, scary title, you feel very cushioned and comfortable working with people like that around you, because everybody's done this before, both with the Ratchet series and in other games. And that any imperfections that I may have in the work that I'm doing, are cushioned by other people on the project who can kind of step in and say, hey, what do you think about this? And, we all work very collaboratively. We get together, even at a distance in meetings and say, all right, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about this. How does everybody feel about this? And everybody is so talented and so good that you don't have to make all those decisions yourself. And everybody has so much experience with the Ratchet series that we can look back on all the past things that we've done in Ratchet, or that were even done with the original series. And there's only, I think, maybe a handful, 5 people, which is pretty good actually, considering that, it's been going for 15 years. Of people who worked on the original Ratchet series who are still there. I think it may actually be more than 5. It might actually be 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. But essentially, the creators of the series are still there. Anytime that I've got any questions about how something should feel, I have somebody to go to and say, hey, we did this. How do you feel about that? And that makes you feel very confident in the decisions you're making as you go along.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing here is it was easy, relaxing, and stress-free, the whole development.
And you are calling me on that totally. No, actually, it was actually a very short project. We were called to make this title in a very short time, but we also didn't want it to be. It's not just a conversion. We didn't want it to be just better graphics with the same stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's an enormous amount of new material in this that even though you may have played the first one, you'll be playing this new one under conditions where you'll see stuff that's completely different. We also needed to retrofit back in systems that didn't exist in the first one. The very first Ratchet and Clank didn't have any of the sort of RPG-ish elements. You didn't upgrade your weapons. He didn't have the whole weapon customization system and things like that. So actually, I shouldn't say customization. That's a bad way of putting it. The depth of systems that we started adding in the second Ratchet and Clank and then on continuing into the future series were things that we really wanted to get in, but we needed to get them in a way that satisfied the players, brought the gameplay up to speed with the expectations and the quality of the current Ratchet and Clank series. Mm-hmm. But we didn't want to leave behind all of the key things from the old series. So there was this really interesting balancing act every time we got in a room of, okay, this is how this particular level played out, or this particular setup, or this particular weapon worked, or this particular enemy worked, or this particular game mechanic worked in the original. How do we retain what that was, in the original, in its essence, and not break that, but do it a little better? Mm-hmm. How can we make each individual little thing, every game mechanic just a little bit better? Because we've learned so much since that first Ratchet and Clank, mm-hmm. that we didn't just want to leave it as, oh, okay, this is what you saw before, but prettier. We wanted to make it better, and we wanted to add more content. And, there's whole additional story elements in there, and it's a big game. Mm-hmm. So there really was a balancing act, and there were a lot of, and it's also a completely different engine than the original one. So there were a lot of technical choices that we had to make. So there was a lot of discussion on, okay, what's the best decision to make here? This enemy with the new weapon systems and the new upgrades and some of the new weapons we've added, if we keep the functionality exactly the same, it's not really all that great. So what do we add to this new enemy that makes them more functional? And then you get together with animation, because now you've added a whole bunch of new animations and new things like that. Plus animation has their own agenda. They want to make all the animations way better than they were in the original. And the effects guys have things that they want to accomplish, and, and so on and so forth. So you end up having, sort of multidisciplinary sessions over each enemy and each weapon and, all the different mechanics of the game and what can we do? What are the steps we can take to take that next step further and bring it up to, 15 years later, modern gameplay standards, but still retain what the original was. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of big meetings and a lot of hard choices, and we had to do it all very fast. That's
cool. So, I can tell from what you're saying, though, you feel like it's turned out pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
You're happy with it?
Oh, yeah. We're all extremely pleased with it. It is, the honest truth is we were able to get a lot more into that game than I ever thought we would. When I would sit down with Brian Algier and Mike Daly or Sean McCabe, and we'd kind of hash out what we thought we wanted to do with different areas, we had a wish list, that we kind of put together of, how much more could we improve this one level, or what else could we add to this game mechanic? And we got through a lot of our wish list. And that's a real testament to the dedication of all of the team members, that everybody was really committed to, yeah, man, let's just get awesome stuff in.
So it kind of brings me on to another thing. So a common problem that comes up on games is when you're developing it, you're so close to it that it can become hard to say whether it's fun. Like, it's kind of easy to play somebody else's game, or, buy a game at GameStop and then, play it and say, okay, yeah, I think this is fun, or this one's not fun. But when you're working on a game, it's really quite hard to say it's fun. Now, how do you know, or how does your team work out whether, like, you've got something that's good and that the audience are going to like? And how sure are you of that determination?
So some of this is a lot of studying other games. A lot of that over many, many, many years. All of us have studied all of the old, Marios, the Crash Bandicoots, all the predecessors, even our own stuff. We go back and replay our own work that was highly praised and go, okay, what did we do here that worked? Let's not forget that. Let's remember that. Let's look into the details of why certain setups are remembered above other ones. And we write this stuff down. I remember I did 23 pages of single spaced bullet points on why the setups in and how the setups in Up Your Arsenal worked so well, so that I could come to a good understanding of all of those at one point when I was at Insomniac. So it really is a hardcore study session all the time on what works in other titles. But you try and abstract that out, to what you're doing, and you apply that. So, and then there's some instinct. There's just some, after 20 years of doing this and watching kids play test your games, or adults play test your games, or whoever it is, over and over and over again, and seeing where the successes and failures are, you do get a general sense of some of the things that are going to work and some of the things that aren't. Now, things change over time, and that's why we play test. So the other thing we do is we take the game mechanics and we put them pretty early, through playtesting sessions. Sometimes it's what we call friends and family playtests, where it's really informal. We just bring people in. Sometimes we just bring people from the other side of the company who haven't seen what we're doing in a little while over and say, hey, try this out. And we don't tell them anything and stick a game controller in their hand, and then, usually walk away completely in tears because our grand idea didn't work. But and sometimes it does. Sometimes it's like, holy, that worked. That was amazing. But in the end, you write all this down. You observe and you write all it down, and you talk about what worked and what didn't work. And you make plans. You make big, giant lists of things that you're going to adjust. And that's the same whether it's a focus test on a specific game mechanic, or whether you're doing a full playthrough a level, or whether you're doing, the kind of marathon. Hey, let's take people for 2 to 3 hours a day for 4 days in a row and see if we can put them through 80% of the game and see how the entire game fares, and see if they're getting bored at certain points or completely forget the story, or, the bigger picture stuff that you can't get by just putting them through one level. So we do that a lot. And that helps us smooth out everything from, whether the players understand a particular weapon, or the way to defeat a particular enemy, to, are they dying too much in a particular place? Is it too easy? Are they not dying enough? All the way to story comprehension, and then just overall pacing. Are they getting to a point where they're not doing any of the fun things? They're just blowing through it because they want to get through it, in which case, okay, we don't have something in there that needs to be in there, or we need to cut something. Mm-hmm.
I like, you just mentioned story comprehension. I can just imagine, like, playing the game and then somebody, like, pressing pause for me and saying, right, what have we learned, in the last 5 minutes? What was his motivation? Just to see if you're really paying attention.
That actually is almost exactly what happens. Yeah. The facilitators, who are not involved in the making of the game, so they don't have any stake in what the answers are, will stop the game, stop people playing, which with the 8-year-olds can sometimes be very difficult. And we'll say, okay, so what's going on at this point? And the answers you get are, sometimes it's like everybody gets it, and well, not everybody, it's never everybody, but 9 out of 10 people get it. And you're like, woohoo, we got it. And other times, you get answers that just make you go, oh boy. Okay. Let's figure that one out.
That's cool. So I'm going to moving backwards to Sunset Overdrive. So that was a huge game. There was a lot of anticipation, had these great visuals, very like a fun and funny game to play. And it's had great reviews too. How was it developing that game?
I had a lot of fun on that game. I mean, that game was hard. Not in a bad way. It was hard in a challenging way. We were doing something really new, with the, you're going to be traversing and shooting all the time. And that's the game, and that was like, okay, how do you build the systems and build the game dynamics to make moving at that speed and bouncing off of things and switching weapons and firing your weapons and, the systems for allowing all the enemies to get anywhere in the map, and, have that all actually run, within frame and in memory and all those things. It was epic. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. It really was epic, but it was a absolutely brilliant property. Marcus and Drew, the two creative directors, and Marcus, I think Drew is actually technically called the design director on it. That was their vision and their baby, and that was followed on. Everybody sort of got on the page with them and just ran with it, and everybody started adding their own little bits to it as it grew and became kind of its own animal. Everybody was really proud of what we were making. We all knew we were making something different and interesting and fun, and everybody was getting to put a bit of themselves, a deep bit of themselves into that game. And we were able to walk away from that going, yeah, we really made something. We made something that is unique and different and interesting. And years from now, we know people are going to be referencing it and talking about it.
There was, I think one of the characters was like, I don't know whether he was wearing underwear and like a feather boa or something.
Oh, it's amazing. You can wear.
Was that the bit that you put into the game for you?
No, that's I wish, but that was actually the story behind the character customization is awesome, and I was absolutely proud to be there alongside of that. So it was critically important at the beginning for Drew and Marcus to allow you to be who you wanted to be, regardless of what that was. And Jacinda, the art director, and Gavin, the lead character artist, and other people they jumped on that, and they just said, we're just going to run with this. And they churned out an unbelievable amount of customization options, and all of them go on any character. And I was actually there at the very first playtest. I was one of the observers taking notes at the very first playtest where we opened up that character customization system to the playtesters. And the first guy who got to the changing closet, the very first thing he puts on is the bunny ears, a leather corset, the kangaroo codpiece, combat boots, and nothing else. And he played the entire rest of the game with in his whole glory like that. And I just thought that was the most amazing indicator of success that you could ever have. And the other thing is that the other 9 players all looked completely different. They all picked things that made them look completely different and had a completely different vibe.
Just very kind of prudish, kind of, I'm going to the library kind of clothes.
There was one guy who made himself, who got the top hat and the coat with tails, and he had the beefy character, and, he looked like, something out of, Mr. Jekyll or Dr. Hyde or whichever one you want.
I like it. Kind of English.
It was awesome. But wrong.
That's cool. So this brings up another question that I had for you. So you've worked on a range of games. I mean, Sunset Overdrive, it's pretty open world, but there's cinematic story going through it. And Ratchet, of course, has got a lot of cinematic storytelling. And there's this kind of spectrum of people, and some people really like cinematic elements in games. On the other end, you've got people that just want gameplay and, you know, no story or no cinematics. And then people in the middle maybe who say, okay, yeah, make it cinematic, but don't turn player control off and don't snap the camera away. I'm just wondering, how do you personally feel about the balance between storytelling and gameplay, and how do you like to handle that when you're making a game?
If the player is doing something, or the character is doing something that as a player I can do in game with the character, I prefer to be doing it. So I think the BioShocks do this exceptionally well, where you are almost always in control of your character at all times. And that's great, you know. And then the other end of it is a situation, you know, that you have with most first-person shooters, Resistance included, where you'll have a cinematic, but the cinematic is dominantly there where you don't have control. It's dominantly there to set up, to get character and story across. But almost everything else you're doing is in game. And then you'll get to a point where it's like, okay, well, we have another character moment, so we'll stop you. Or we have a moment where a big monster is emerging from the ground, you know, and we'll stop you and we'll show it in a really dramatic way, and then we're back to gameplay again. So my preference is to use player control off moments and camera work, custom camera work, and things like that to set you up for what's coming, but not to do it for you. Mm-hmm. Let the player be the one who actually does all the action moments, but set them up in a cool way. Cool. Or when you get to emotional moments and, you know, you need a close-up. Well, you know, sometimes you want to actually, you know, kind of like force that and bring that in. And I feel like that actually is a good balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. Do you like it, like Resident Evil sort of did it first, as far as I'm aware, but I don't play all that many games, but where you're kind of playing a cinematic and then it's like, okay, now mash X or now press A, like right in the middle, kind of like, okay, not Resident Evil, what was that? Dragon's Quest? Something years ago. Do you like that style of, sort of cinematic and gameplay merging?
I think it can work. It could be, there's dangers to it. It can be too long. If you're taking away something that the player can do anyway in game, then that's kind of problematic. The button that you're pressing should correspond to something you can do in game. So if during this very canned cinematic, but I need to press X button, you are instructed to press X. Well, if X is your jump button, then whatever you're doing in that cinematic, when you press X, better actually be, you know, jump related, you know, rather than just totally picking an arbitrary button this time. So I think because it needs to feel natural. It needs to feel like, oh, I'm actually doing that thing. I just need to do it with a fairly specific timing. And the other aspect of this I think is really important is that I think players are really tolerant of these moments when they're dramatic in a way that you can't get with the regular gameplay. When the buttons are consistent with what you do in the regular gameplay, when they're brief, and also, when the tolerances on the button press are really broad, when the tolerances on the button press are really tight, when it's literally like put the button up and for the 0.4 of a second that button is up is the only time that you're ever going to have success. That results in a lot of frustrating failure for players. It's better to actually have the tolerances be very broad and to actually extend beyond when the button is visually on screen. So that players, you know, can do this sort of kind of really cool, awesome feeling thing, but, you know, aren't necessarily
punished
quite
too much. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
All right. So,
oh, and use them sparingly, and don't repeat them. I'm looking at you, Rise. Sorry.
All right. Okay, I've got quite a few questions to get through, so I'm going to try and speed up a little here. So, when I worked with you, one of the main takeaways I got about how you worked was you play the whole game all the time and just pile tasks into the bug base. like from big things down to just tiny minutia. Like, I remember that you entered more bugs than all of the QA department together for the game we worked on. And I've worked on a lot of games since, and I frequently tell people about that approach that, you know, someone needs to be playing the game and just piling in bugs just to polish everything. I was just kind of curious, like, do you still work that way? Is that your MO?
I do still work that way, although I try to be a little more diplomatic about it these days. One of the things that when I went over to Insomniac is that everybody is so talented that generally speaking, they've already really got their eye on the same thing that I've got my eye on, but we still need to track it. So somebody's got to actually put it into the bug database or the task database, and very often that's fallen on me in a lot of categories. So now I'm not the only one doing this on projects. We would get Brian Algeier is also very much works that way. He'll go through and he will put in just incredible minutia of let's speed this up by say like half a second. Let's cut here instead of there, and all these presentation things, related to just everything presentation related or anything he's picking out. And then as a lead designer in general, I try to focus on the gameplay. I try to focus on like, okay, well, what can I do? My job is to make sure that all the gameplay stuff is tight. And sometimes that dips over into presentation, especially with effects and things like that. But I try to focus on keeping it to clarity of the gameplay rather than the overall presentation, which I try to let the creative director, handle that a lot more, or the art director or animation director, things like that. Now, in some cases, I take over a little bit more. And on Ratchet PS4, that ended up being the case. Brian Algeier ended up getting leaving the project, not the company, but he ended up moving on to another project and kickstarting another project early before we actually were finished. And due to the need to have him spearheading this new project and driving that forward, somebody really had to step up and start looking at just every tiny little thing on Ratchet, right down to dust from footsteps from a particular character, or just missing sounds for these little background elements and stuff like that. And so I went ahead and volunteered to, or kind of stepped up and just started, dropping all those in. So yeah, indeed, I did. One of the things that I also try to do, though, is I try to get together with the people that this is going to affect first. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes I end up blindsiding people, and I'm really sorry to those of you who I blindsided. But I really do try to get together with the people that are going to get these tasks, and we talk about it first, and we come to an agreement on what needs to be done, and then I let them know that these are going to be, go in the bug database, so that there's not a huge, giant, massive surprise when these things all show up.
Yeah, it can be difficult to kind of. Everyone's really invested in the game, and emotionally, and their egos are in there too. And it can be difficult when someone just dumps in, right, change this. Yeah.
Well, and then a lot of times it's not even a change; it's more of a, hey, let's make sure that we actually get this animation blend in, because it'll make this particular walk cycle look a lot better when we do this particular thing. So. And a lot of times I will, I'll go to the animation director or the animation lead or the animator of that character, and I'll say, hey, I know you're probably already got this on your radar personally, but I'm just letting you know I'm going to be dumping a lot of this in the bug database. Feel free to get to it when you guys get to it on your own schedule. Just cool. Be very cool about the fact that all this is going to go in. It's not a judgment. It's not a, hey, why don't we have this yet? It's more of a, hey, we just want to make sure we're tracking all these things.
Cool. So that the sort of entering hundreds of bugs was my guess at the answer to this question. So I'm kind of curious if I got it or whether the answer is going to be something different. But so if I was a designer, I'd want to be in your shoes, because you're working at a top tier studio on huge games like Ratchet. I'm curious, and you've worked your way up into the lead position to, be able to do that. So I'm curious, like, what's the secret of your success? What's your secret sauce?
I drink a lot every morning before I go to work.
Me too.
See, it works. That's a really tough one to put your finger on. I think part of it is that I've been really, really fortunate right from the beginning to be surrounded by unbelievably talented people who, especially when I was really young, were willing to show me how to be better. And
thanks, Joel. I enjoyed working with you too.
Actually, I thought we actually worked really well together. That project, that was a tough one to do what we did in that amount of time, but we got it smooth.
So your answer is you got lucky by just being around a bunch of talented people.
I mean, that's not it, but it helped. Part of it was being taught some practices for excellence. Really studying other people's work, seriously studying it, writing it down, breaking it down into tiny little things, looking at other people's lectures, online, and seeing what the best people in the industry have to say about how to make things work. And then putting it into practice, actually doing it, and doing it over again, and throwing your work out and doing it over again, and being incredibly scrutinizing of your own work, and like never kill your babies, basically. You gotta look at your work at some point and go, you gotta get started. I mean, you gotta get started and you gotta build something. And then you gotta look at what you've built and go, that's not good enough. What do I need to make it better? And you gotta actually make it better. And you gotta do that again and again and again.
And that's what is meant by killing your babies, just for anybody listening.
Yeah. Yes, some people call it killing your darlings, I believe, in the writing.
Okay,
world.
that's nicer.
Call it killing your babies because we're really vicious.
Cool. So, changing topic a little bit, I know that over the years you've done a lot of hiring work. You probably read thousands of resumes. Thinking now of listeners that might be wanting to get into game design as a profession, what do you look for in a resume? Like if I was writing a designer resume, what would get my resume into the bring for interview pile?
So if you're an existing designer in the industry with some work, the pieces of advice I could give are keep it brief. We do occasionally we still see resumes that are multiple pages, and unless you've been in the industry for 10 years or more, try to keep it to a page. These days we're a little bit more loose about that. If you're coming from Europe, it's kind of understood that you're going to have a bigger multi-page resume. There is a cultural difference, and so we take that into account. But in general, unless you've been in the industry for a while, keep it to a page. And we want to know what titles you've been on. We want to know how long you were on those titles, and we want to know what you did. We actually want to know what part of that title were you personally responsible for, and if there was something you were particularly proud of accomplishing, within that particular system. That's what we really want to know. That's going to get our interest, looking at your resume and being able to quickly go, oh, they were on this, they were on this, they were on this, and they did this on this title, and this on this title, and this on this title. Okay, this is a guy that, we want to bring in. The other thing I would say, I want to be very clear, is be honest. This is less of a problem these days than it has been in the past, but you can't BS on your resume. It's just too small of an industry. You just can't do it. You've got to be really, really honest about what you were on, what position you actually had, how long you were on it, what you did on it. Because people know. When people know, and it is not difficult to figure out the truth of it. And quite frankly, there's times when we don't really even need to really figure out the truth of it. I've seen enough resumes that you can smell when something's off pretty quick.
So, if you've looked at thousands of resumes, you must have seen some pretty amusing ones. Like, what's the best resume or interview fail that you've seen?
Oh man, so thousands is a little strong, but definitely in the probably mid hundreds. That's quite a bit, and probably a good 100 phone interviews or more on top of that, and a couple dozens, like multiple dozens of design tests evaluated. So yeah, there's been an awful lot. The biggest fail, I have two short stories here. The biggest fail was probably a resume that I got that was probably 2.5 pages long. And it was an American, so it was, sort of culturally, you don't really do this unless you've been in the industry for 20 years kind of thing.
Yeah, technically that's a novella, I think. And
it had, this person had on the order of about 15 to 20 titles a year on it over the course of 5 years. And it was, that is exactly the reaction that you have. You laugh when you see it, and you're just like,
I don't think I could play that many games.
Way that this is possible. And then, of course, you actually, do a brief looking into it, and, just to verify that, this is indeed, a bad apple. And you find out very quickly that, this guy's got nothing. So yeah, that was one. The other one that I've seen, and this is a little bit of a different take on it, is I've seen people applying for the wrong positions. And, that's always disappointing. I've seen some people who should have been applying for design positions that have been applying for producer positions. And I've seen people who were really actually more producers, who were applying for design positions. And it wasn't necessarily that they weren't talented in either one. It's just that, they were applying to fields that they weren't necessarily an expert in. And
maybe they just wanted to break out of what they were doing.
Yeah, and in some cases I think that's true, but in some cases I think they were underselling themselves. In some cases I think we were seeing a situation where somebody really was worthy and probably did want to be a designer, but were applying for an AP position instead.
Right.
And they really should have actually been shooting higher. And so there is a little bit of, and I've seen the opposite as well, where somebody really wanted a senior position and wasn't really quite qualified for it, but otherwise was actually really good. And those are disappointing, because you want to hire those people because they're talented, and they're talented, but they're not exactly what you're looking for. You need somebody with more management skills, and this person is not yet, kind of a management thought process going on, but they're a talented designer. So sometimes you just, that's one of the parts of being one of the people who's involved with a lot of hiring is that you see a lot of people that you would really like to hire, and it's heartbreaking not to be able to hire everybody that's that you want to hire.
So when people go through interview, what do you find tends to separate hires from no hires? And sorry, my brain just suggested race. That would
Wow.
Yeah, race is definitely not one of the things.
Not one of the things. No, nothing. Actually, nothing. Nothing superficial ever is going to be one of those things.
So Joel, tell me, what separates hires from no hires? Race, gender, religion. Which of those? No, I'm just kidding.
Let's keep digging here. I think this is true in general. I'll speak to that just for a moment. Is that we, I myself, and we as a company, and every place I've ever been is completely agnostic to.
Yes, I totally agree. I've got a silly sense of humor. What your life is like and
what you do outside of work, so that's one of the things that I've actually always been really grateful for. Mm-hmm. Is that in general, I've been a part of teams and companies that, where it's that we've never run into that at all. And I know that exists other places, but it's been great because we've seen everybody from every part of the world, every gender, every lifestyle, everything walk through those doors for design positions. And that's a neat thing to see.
Yeah. Just to try and sort of fill in that hole, that's one of the things I really like about working in games is I see it as a meritocracy. Everybody's there because they can do what it is they're there to do, and it's not based on anything else. And I also feel like sometimes it's kind of like being in a Benetton ad or something. You just got like one of every race, gender, you name it, in the office, and that everyone just works well together because everyone's just focused on making the games.
It's amazing. One of the things that happens at Insomniac, if you're walking around, is, I can probably hear 5 different languages being spoken, with people talking with their family or, stuff on a cell phone or whatever on a regular basis. And that's just, you just don't get that very many places, but it's neat.
So, all right. So, once again, like, what do you think separates hires from no hires? And I guess kind of what I'm thinking with this question is, like, maybe it's character traits or, well, sorry, I should let you answer. Go ahead.
So the process that we've been using, and I personally like to use since, all the way back to our heavy iron days, and even a little bit before, is a screening process where, you screen down from the resumes to a pool of people that, you want to talk to on the phone. Then you speak to them on the phone and, you walk through the resume and you ask enough questions to get a general idea of, do they really know what they say they think that they know according to the resume? And then, we usually give a design test, an actual design test that involves designing a portion of a level, a few questions. We don't do that. We haven't done that as much lately, mostly because a lot of the talent that we've had applying for positions over the last couple of years have been people that we don't feel like we need to give a design test to because we could just go play their work because it's in shipped games and they're really good games. That's a good position to be in when you're hiring, is to be able to be looking at those kinds of people where you're like, yes, I've already played your work. Woohoo.
That's pretty cool.
So, in those cases, it's like when you're in that position, you can kind of skip the design test. And you boil your phone interviews down to, for a position down into like maybe your top 5, you want to bring in. And then those are the ones that you actually bring in and do a face-to-face with. And you put them through a face-to-face with a bunch of different people. At Insomniac, we like to do kind of 2 people at a time, in a room over the course of the morning, so maybe, 4 sessions of that and you go in and you ask various different questions. And mainly it comes down to a couple of things. Do they really know design? Can you ask them a couple of fundamental design questions? And do they have a good, solid opinion that is based on experience? And can they back that opinion up with observable things that they saw people doing, based on their opinion on whatever that question was that we did? So there's a lot of verifying that. And sometimes people will fumble that answer or that question. Sometimes people are nervous. And so we give people a little bit of a break there. You're in an interview. You've just been probably flown in from somewhere. You can be tired. You can be nervous. So we'll often ask follow-up questions. Like if somebody didn't quite get that, we'll kind of let that go and we'll ask a follow-up question. And so we'll give people multiple chances to kind of get into the depth of why a particular game mechanic may or may not have worked in a game that they made, or why a particular level layout worked in a level that they made, but maybe in this other level they made, things didn't feel maybe quite as good, or what they didn't feel felt quite as good. And can they back up their answer? Can they give well-reasoned thoughts on what was working and why it was working and why it wasn't working and what they would have done differently? We really want people who are self-critical of their own work. We want people who have concrete thoughts and answers, very specific ones, right down to, man, that one cover piece, I should have moved it over a meter. Sometimes that's honestly the level that we're looking at. And the last part of it is, do we get along with them? And that's generally not a difficult thing because there's a lot of different personality types out there and we tend to all mesh pretty well. But every once in a while, you get somebody in your face-to-face interview who just talks badly about their previous employer or something like that for the whole time. Mm. And, it's really hard to kind of get over that. Maybe they just had a bad day. That might be the case. But you want to bring somebody into your environment who's going to look at problem solving from a positive, proactive way, because that's how you get results. And that's how everybody figures out how to solve problems collectively in a way that sort of satisfies, each department as best as you can. And, so it is possible, to torpedo a face-to-face interview once you're in there. It doesn't happen very often. So, But it is usually by the time we get to the face-to-face interview part, it's every person we're looking at is somebody that we're interested in hiring.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difficult decision to boil it down to the one person that we actually have the slot for.
So, pulling things from earlier answers and what you just said, like one of the things I can see is to be very analytical and detail oriented, and also very literate in terms of game design and, actually playing lots of games. And I think one of the critical things is, like, if you were like a high school student or something and you've got this idea, I really want to design games. I think perhaps like one of the exercises you could do would be pick a game, put it in, play it for 60 seconds or 2 minutes, and then stop and write down 10 things that you either liked or didn't like or would improve about that minute or 2 minutes, and then do it again, do the next 2 minutes of the game and see what you pick out this time. I think that kind of exercise, perhaps that's something that a lot of designers just kind of do organically to start with, but that kind of exercise, like bringing focus and analysis to the gameplay, would be a good exercise to sort of head in the direction of being a proper game designer. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're dead on there. I actually have a friend of mine and a former Insomniac designer who has a Patreon where she's actually teaching game design via her Patreon. She does exactly that. She picks a current game, she Twitch streams it, and with her students and our supporters, and they play for a little while, and then they stop and talk about what they just played, and talk about why it worked or didn't, and and it's that's exactly it. And I do think that is exactly what game designers do, and gameplay, gameplay coders and artists and people who are in the game industry who are interested in why things work is you play something and then you get to a point where you stop and you go, whoa, that was awesome. All right, why was that awesome? And then you just kind of start, and sometimes there are times, most of the time when I'm playing, that's more organic. There are times when I'm playing a game where I actually will keep a notepad next to me. Even 20 years into my professional career, I will still occasionally be playing a game that is specifically relevant to what I'm doing or something new that I want to learn. I will keep a notepad next to me and I'll actually write down what is working and why it's working and what's not working and what's not working. And, patterns that I'm seeing, progression, patterns that I'm seeing and how things are being done, all sorts of stuff.
That's cool. All right. One last question. If you were to give advice to a junior designer on how to up their game and get to a lead position, what would you tell them to do?
There was a quote that I'm going to paraphrase that I'm hoping is actually from this source, but it's been a long time since I've verified this. Jimmy Stewart, when he was later in his career, said that he found that it was better to be liked than right. And he also said that he wished he'd have learned that when he was a lot younger. And I can totally echo that sentiment at this point in my career, is that everybody's pulling to make this game. Every department has different perspectives on what needs to be accomplished. It is sometimes difficult to mesh those perspectives. It makes things work a lot better, and it makes people a lot more interested in seeing your perspective if A, you see theirs, and B, you go about discussing what the options are and what the needs are for the project or what your opinion is in a very friendly way. Humor helps. It's the difference between being a really talented designer, one of the differences, and being able to take a lead position is whether or not you can actually get along with the other leads, whether or not you can work with the other leads to find common ground and help them accomplish their goals as leads of their department. And sometimes that means giving up on some of the things you really want. And sometimes that means giving up on some of the things that your team really wants and coming back to them and kind of breaking the news. But in the end, if everybody is pulling together and you end up with a good product, you won't remember what you cut or what you compromised. Mostly. I think we all look back at our games and actually see one or a few things that we're like, man, I wish we'd have really done that. But ultimately, the vast majority of the things, you won't even remember that you cut them or changed them, even a year after you ship sometimes, because they didn't matter. And it matters far, far more to get along with the rest of the team members. There's a lot more to being a good lead as well, but I would say that that's probably one of the biggest leaps between being a talented designer and being a lead on a project.
So it's kind of there is no I in team kind of thing. It's about collaboration, helping everybody get what they want, as well as your own things in there too. But it's basically a focus on teamwork. And I think maybe when you're younger, you tend to be more egocentric and like, I've got this vision for this game and how it's going to be, and I'm going to force this through, and I don't care if people don't like me. But what you're saying is you'll get a better product overall if everybody's happily sort of working together, and you put you sort of take yourself slightly out of the equation. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And it's finding the good ideas wherever they are. In whatever side, and some of that is the ability to be agnostic to your own ideas. You are the collective vision holder of things, of the collective of all the visions. You're not there to push forward your own ideas. You can help shape things, but man, you get so much better work out of everybody if you can really get people to open up about what they want to get into the product, and then find the things that work for that product and push them forward and get those people excited about focusing on the parts, the ideas that they came up with themselves that do fit in the product and work. And again, it's that being able to work with all of the people that way. There are great ideas that come from every aspect of the product. We've got a guy, one of our lighters, consistently comes up with some of the best gameplay ideas every project, and he's one of the lighting guys. But I've learned that, man, when he speaks up and he sends out an email, he's got something to say.
It's tough, isn't it? Because like I had this just the other day. Like I had it in my head. Okay, I'm going to do it this way. And then and it's a programming thing. And then a non-programmer said, shouldn't we do it this way? And I walked away and was like, damn it, he's right. And I was like, I really want to be right, because if I'm right, then he gets to be dumb, I get to be clever, and my ego gets this great massage. And, but I was like, no, he's right. I'm the dumb one this time. It's like, I've got to accept that.
It is a bit of a mental and emotional leap to go from, I have to have all the good ideas, to, man, everybody's got all the good ideas, and that doesn't diminish me.
Right. Awesome. Joel, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for making the time to come on the show.
It's been awesome.
Cool. All right, I'll catch up with you soon. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If so, please subscribe and tell your friends. You can see the show notes and more online at jollygoodjobs.com/show. If you'd like to get in touch or be on the show, you can mail me at mark@jollygoodjobs.com. The show's excellent intro music is by Lazyitis. To find his work, go to soundcloud.com and search Lazyitis. The intro voice and audio production were by Garner Knutson. The Jolly Good Show comes to you from jollygoodjobs.com, where your game studio can post its open positions for free. Toodle pip.